Hi, I'm Lisa Leiter. In Chicago Business Today, the banking year in review. 2010 was a year marked by local bank failures. Since early 2009, 25 banks have failed in the Chicago area. And most notably this year, there was that memorable Friday evening in April when regulators seized 7 banks at once, including Broadway Bank, owned by the family of Alexi Janulius. Later came the failure of Shore Bank after an extraordinary Wall Street engineered bailout of the prominent Southside lender fell short. Senior reporter Steve Daniels sat down with me to talk more about what to expect from the banking industry in 2011. So Steve, you recently wrote that we're probably about halfway through the banking failures in the Chicago area. How many more are we looking at for 2011, and why are we still expecting so many more, even though it seems like the economy has started to turn a corner?
There's a lot of banks that are in very bad shape that are sort of been twisting in the wind for a number of quarters. Some of those banks are going to fail. Now, whether it's another 25 or another 20 or something in the high teens, I mean, the improving economy may have something to say about that if it's improving right at the minute. We're going to have plenty more failures, and exactly how many more, we'll just have to see.
What are your sources saying right now about the state of commercial lending in town? Has it loosened up at all?
It's loosened up a lot. If you are trying to finance your commercial industrial business, you're going to have many, many choices, particularly if you've made it through the recession. You don't have too much debt on your books, and you're not struggling to pay that down. You are sort of holding fast. You got lots of choices at a really competitive pricing. The market has come back very, very strong.
And you bring up a good point. There are a lot of players in that mid-size commercial lending market. Who's likely to stand out in 2011?
There's a whole host of players in Chicago that are going after this business, and they're all going after the same kind of business, which makes it, of course, good for the borrower. Mid-sized banks like MB Financial Private Bancorp, Cole Taylor, Wintrust, First Midwest, First Merit out of Akron, Ohio is making a strong play. All those banks are open for business and wanting business. Then bigger guys. Chase is the market leader. They're going strong for this stuff. Harris Bank, very, very active in commercial lending. U.S. Bank, Fifth Third Bank. There's a whole host of out-of-town banks that are also going hard.
Some of those names that you mentioned still have some TARP money that needs to be repaid. What do you foresee happening with that next year?
Well, we've had the first of the mid-sized banks announce plans to repay in Wintrust. Towards maybe the latter half of the year, some of the other players may follow suit. Many of those other players are still digging out of their loan problems, much more so than Wintrust. So it could be even a 2012 event, but I would look for more TARP repayment toward the end of 2011.
Is that going to be a big issue next year, do you think?
It's going to be a bigger issue. I mean, so people have forgotten about TARP. We haven't heard much about it. Now we're going to hear more about it as these banks, this next wave of banks, the big guys, the Chases, the B of A's, have all paid it back. The next wave of banks starts to pay it back, where you had some who've paid and some who can't, and there might be a differentiation in terms of how people view, investors in particular, view those banks.
Speaking of next waves, we had the news in recent weeks that Harris Bank's parent, Bank of Montreal, buying Marshall & Ilsley, the largest bank in Wisconsin. Are we going to see M&A coming back in 2011?
Yes. The Chicago market's in worse shape than some other markets in the country. I mean, we've seen a lot of purchases of failed banks, but in other parts of the country, banks that are okay shape have been buying each other or merging. We're not seeing that in Chicago in no small part because this market is in worse shape than some others in terms of the quality of banks' balance sheets, but I think we will begin to see some of that unassisted deal making occur in Chicago next year, and 2012 with a vengeance.
And specifically for that deal with Marshall & Ilsley, what does that bank give to Harris?
That bank gives Harris a real regional footprint. Harris has in essence been a Chicago bank for its existence. It's made some deals here and there to break out of the Chicago market, and that's been the goal of Bank of Montreal, or BMO Financial, has been to create a regional Midwestern bank, not just a Chicago bank. M&I gives them that. It gives them Wisconsin, or the biggest player in Wisconsin now. It gives them a much bigger footprint in Indiana. It puts them into St. Louis. They get sizable branches in Arizona and Florida. Harris is suddenly a real regional bank.
Is there anybody in this market that's in play that you've got your eye on?
There's a whole host of privately held banks that need money and in essence are in play. But among the publicly traded banks, you know, I think some will look to partner up ultimately. Whether that's next year or not, you know, that's hard to say. There's going to be consolidation in Chicago. That is very clear. The interesting thing will be who is partnering up with whom, and that'll be the sort of game over the course of the next year or two to try to figure out.
All right, Steve, we'll be watching. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And that's this edition of Chicago Business Today. You can get all of the latest banking headlines at chicagobusiness.com. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.